3 decades after police uncovered the House of Horrors, the home of Fred and Rosemary West in Gloucester, England, questions remain unanswered. A teenage sister disappears, and an unsettling family joke comes to light. A warning to their children: if they misbehave, they'll end up under the patio like their sister. Were there more victims? Will we ever truly know the full extent of their crimes? And were they acting alone? Or could others have been involved? Rumors began to circulate about a possible network of other participants and underground tunnels beneath Gloucester. One woman escaped, Caroline Roberts, the only known survivor and a key witness who offered the world its only glimpse into what really happened behind the thick brick walls of 25 Cromwell Street, and to the 12 known victims who weren't able to escape. Welcome to Deep, Dark and Scary, a channel where we dive into the most chilling true crime cases, mysterious disappearances, tragic deaths, real-life disasters, and incredible stories of survival against all odds. My name is Jenny, and this is my first video, so thank you so much for being here. Today, we're exploring one of the most disturbing cases in British history, the story of Fred and Rosemary West, as I'm sure a lot of you know from the Netflix documentary that just came out. A couple whose crimes shook the world and whose home would come to be known as the House of Horrors. This is the case that sent shockwaves across Europe and made people look twice at their seemingly normal neighbors, wondering what kind of darkness might be hiding behind closed doors. Warning: this story contains content that may be distressing for some listeners. In a quiet neighborhood in Gloucester, England, behind the brick walls of 25 Cromwell Street lived Fred and Rosemary West, a hard-working builder in his 50s and his devoted housewife with their 9 children. An ordinary couple at first glance, they carried out some of the most horrific crimes in British history. Over the course of 2 decades, they abducted and subjected their victims to literally unspeakable acts. Those weren't just strangers. Some of them were friends and others family members, including their own daughters. This is not just the story of a homicidal match made in hell, their house and codependent psychopathy, but also the story of deep trauma and brave survivors speaking out. This case also highlights the value of forensic science and criminal psychology, and is of cultural and legal importance as it exposed major flaws in the system and revealed the repeated failures of institutions that were meant to protect the most vulnerable. And we'll get into it all. Fred West was born in 1941 into a poor, dysfunctional and abusive family of farm workers in rural England. His father was reportedly controlling and his mother overprotective. Fred later claimed that his mother began exploiting him when he was just 12 years old, and that his father had also targeted his sisters. These disturbing dynamics shaped his early understanding of power and intimacy in deeply damaging ways. By his 20s, Fred himself had already committed offenses of intimate nature and was obsessed with control and domination. Rosemary Letts was born in 1953 and also had an abusive and unstable upbringing. During her pregnancy, Rosemary's mother, Daisy, underwent electroconvulsive therapy, a psychiatric treatment involving small electric currents passed through the brain to trigger brief seizures, often used at the time for severe depression. This treatment is still done today, though in a far more controlled and humane manner than back then. This led some to speculate whether it may have had lasting effects on Rosemary's early development and mental health. Her father suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was reportedly an aggressive and violent man who took advantage of her and her sister. It was the summer of 1969 when 27-year-old Fred spotted 15-year-old Rose waiting at a bus stop, a moment that would mark the beginning of their partnership, and one that echoes a chilling pattern seen throughout this case. At first, Rose found Fred repulsive, but after he relentlessly pursued her and even followed her to her work, she quickly became flattered by his attention and agreed to go on a date with him. Not long after, they became lovers. Despite the age difference and his criminal record, she became a constant visitor at the caravan park where Fred lived with his daughter Anne-Marie and stepdaughter Charmaine from his first marriage with Rena Costello. Rose started taking care of their children. Fred also encouraged Rose to engage in commercial acts with other men at his place. Her parents hit the ceiling when they heard these rumors, and tried to prevent her from being with Fred, even involving authorities. But once Rose turned 16, she moved in with Fred and soon was pregnant with their first daughter, Heather. And in 1972, they moved to 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. In August 1992, social services removed all of Fred and Rose's younger children from the home after one of them raised disturbing allegations. During the following interviews, the children revealed a chilling family joke that their missing sister Heather was buried under the patio. They were warned that if they misbehaved, they could end up there too. During the investigations into Heather's mysterious 7-year-long disappearance, officials initially dismissed this remark. But contradictions of the West stories, friends and school staff raising concerns, and a complete lack of any contact and failure to find her subsequently prompted authorities to take action and obtain a search warrant. In February 1994, after years of rumors, detectives arrived at 25 Cromwell Street to search the house and dig up the garden. Fred was initially interviewed on a voluntary basis and telling officers that his daughter Heather is alive and he had recently seen her in Birmingham. The family joke proved tragically accurate and became a pivotal point in the investigation into the West crimes. Officers don't know it yet, but this will be by far one of Britain's biggest investigations. When Fred was arrested, investigators were shocked that he directly admitted to killing Heather, but the following day he retracted the story until they found her remains. Excavation crews began removing the patio, piece by piece, digging deeper into the soil beneath, and then they found it, a bone. Professor Bernard Knight, a Welsh forensic pathologist who was brought in to examine the scene, recalled in an old documentary, "It was obvious, after 2 seconds, that it was a human thigh bone, female and young. Inspector Bennett was in the hole, handing me pieces, and I remember saying, either she has 3 legs or we've got more than one." But who was the second victim? Investigators pressed Fred for answers. To their shock, he confessed not only to a second, but also a third victim, Shirley Robinson, an ex-lover who was 8 months pregnant with his child, and another young woman he referred to only as Shirley's maid. Fred's story shifted constantly, from admissions to outright denials, even placing the blame on others. But all along, Fred insisted Rose was innocent, that she knew nothing at all. But investigators weren't quite convinced. They began combing through unsolved missing persons files. Marie Bastol, a young waitress who vanished from a bus stop in 1968. Lucy Partington, a university student who disappeared from another bus stop in 1973. As the case made headlines, the phone started ringing. Friends and families of the missing desperate to know, could their loved ones be among the victims? One of those callers was a friend of Linda Goff's family. Her last known address, 25 Cromwell Street. The West rented out rooms in their home to lodgers to make extra money. Then, police learned a chilling detail. While searching for her missing daughter, Linda's mother had once knocked on the West's door. What she saw would stay with her forever. Rosemary was wearing Linda's slippers, and her daughter's nightwear was hanging on the washing line. When questioned, Fred and Rose calmly explained that Linda had simply moved on and just left a few belongings behind. One of Britain's leading forensic and criminal psychologists, Paul Britton, was brought in to help profile Fred West. As he sifted through documents spanning 2 to 3 decades, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. In an interview years later, Britton reflects on what he saw and how the paper trail painted a picture far darker than anyone had imagined. What I began to see were some of the hallmarks, the highlights of a very dangerous offender, not the man that I was told was sitting downstairs. My view was that all that had happened, that you've simply seen 3 high points, and that it was very unlikely, unthinkable really, that you were going to have silences across the intervening years. For investigators, it quickly became obvious. The house was key. Bedrooms used by Rose for commercial adult services were equipped with listening and recording devices, and peepholes to satisfy Fred's voyeuristic tendencies. One of these was called Rose's room, a private space no one else was allowed to enter. Then there was the cellar, buried deep in the lower foundation of the house, a self-contained chamber with no windows, sealed by thick brick walls. It was a place where one could be sure to not be interrupted. Fred really wasted no time. Right after moving in 1972, he renovated the basement. Psychologist Paul Britton remarked, "It serves a joint function. It's the ultimate pleasure room, but also a working room, the room where these dreadful things are done. The victims were in the garden, because the house is already full." Haunted by the past, a single surviving witness to what happened in that cellar contacts the authorities. Caroline Roberts, who worked for the Wests as a nanny and looked after Heather. She recounts, "I listened to the news, and I just went straight back to 1972, and I was there again. And I remembered those words, 'We will bury you under the pavement stones, like hundreds of other girls.' That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was trying to remember all the things that I took 22 years trying to forget." Across several documentaries and her book, Caroline shares her recollections. The night she first encountered the Wests as a 16-year-old, she was hiking home alone when a car pulled up over beside her. Inside were Fred and Rose offering her a ride. What seemed like a chance encounter would reveal a chilling pattern in how the couple searched the countryside for girls, selected and lured their victims to their deaths. At first, Caroline didn't realize Fred and Rose were a couple. Rose was young and attractive, while Fred was anything but. Once inside the car, they struck up a friendly conversation. Caroline soon learned they were recently married and had 3 young daughters. The West also asked about her life, and Caroline explained that she avoided going home due to tension with her stepfather. That's when both of them, at the same time, turned around to her and asked if she'd like to come live with them and help look after their children. Within a week, Caroline had moved in and started caring for Heather, Anne-Marie, and baby May. She also remembered her first impression. One of the strange things was they had a lot of visitors, mainly men. While Caroline looked after the children, Rose would be with the men, claiming to be working as a masseuse, and Caroline believed it at that time. But Caroline would soon learn about Fred's darker side. He told her that he performed abortions and offered to help her if she ever found herself in need. He went on to claim that the women were so grateful they often offered their bodies to him right after. In another incident, in what appeared to be some sort of an attempt to groom Caroline or take her temperature, Fred mentioned that Anne-Marie was no longer a virgin. When she didn't respond the way he'd hoped, he changed his tone, offering a bizarre explanation about a bicycle accident and a saddle coming off, and you can fill in the rest. So Caroline was left completely confused and disturbed, but settling on Fred just having made it all up. Then, when she had a brief fling with one of the lodgers, cheating on her boyfriend, Fred began blackmailing her, pulling her into a weird game of control and manipulation. The final straw for her came when Fred asked her to join in, explaining that Rose really wanted to be intimate with her. Caroline declined the offer, leaving Rose furious. Not long after just 3 short weeks, Caroline left the house, never to return. If only this would have been a decision entirely up to her. A month after that, on December 6th, now a 17-year-old Caroline crossed paths with Fred and Rose again. "I thought they were going to be really angry with me for leaving," she later recalled. Her 12-hour ordeal offered a rare, first-hand glimpse into what probably happened to the victims, an account that 23 years later would become pivotal in court. Caroline's testimony didn't just implicate Rose, it reframed her entirely, not as a passive coerced bystander, but as a sadistic and active participant and a driving force behind the crimes and cruelty. She remembers them, once again, pulling up in their car next to her. They both sat in the front, and Rose opened the window of the passenger side and was all smiling and then said, "Oh, Caroline, I'm so glad to see you. I'm really sorry about what happened." Fred smiled and insisted he didn't mean to upset her and that he'd only been joking. They coaxed her toward the car, saying how much the children and they themselves had missed her. Caroline, despite a gut feeling telling her not to get in, felt pressured by the friendliness and apologies. Against her better judgment, she got in the car. Rose followed her to the back seat. A few miles into the journey, Fred locked eyes with Caroline in the rearview mirror and abruptly asked if she has had intercourse with anyone. Caroline later recalled, "And I just had this feeling come up in my stomach, and I felt sick and thought, oh, here we go again." Fred then ordered Rose to check. As Rose reached for Caroline's parts, a struggle broke out as she tried to resist. Fred pulled the car over and struck Caroline, knocking her unconscious. Caroline came back to find her hands tied and Fred and Rose wrapping parcel tape around her head. A psychological hot and cold game begins. They told her that if she calmed down, they'd give her a cup of tea and a cigarette, and they followed through with that. For a brief moment, an innocent Caroline believed she might actually be safe, that maybe they had just simply made a mistake. Fred and Rose over and over had moments of pretending to care for her injuries, offering comfort and concern, only to draw her in closer and to then inflict even greater harm. After the tea, Rose leaned in and attempted to kiss Caroline, which quickly became more physical, while Fred remained mostly an observer, at least at that point. Then the two began discussing her private areas, leaving Caroline terrified that they might hurt her and attempt something medical and really invasive. The doorbell rang. Caroline tried to scream, but Rose pressed a pillow over her face, attempting to smother her. In a moment where Caroline nearly gave up, Fred returned to the cellar and ripped the pillow away. Now both of them are right in Caroline's face, threatening her, saying, "We're going to keep you in the cellar, and we're going to let our lot of friends use you. And when they're finished with you, we're going to kill you, and we're going to bury you under the paving stones of Gloucester. There are hundreds of girls right there. The police haven't found them, and they're not going to find you." 12 hours of unimaginable physical and psychological pain and torment, fear and control proceeded. Evidence recovered with the victims' remains suggests they endured similar horrors before their lives were ultimately taken. Towards the end, we'll get into the theories, rumors, and indications of other possible accomplices, even talk of a wider network. This case might not be as clear-cut as it seems. Desperate to survive, Caroline promised Fred she wouldn't tell anyone and would stay to help care for the children. Somehow, he believed her and let her live. But at first opportunity, while accompanying Rose and baby May to a local laundromat, Caroline saw her chance and escaped. Her mother persuaded her to go to the police, but the officer started testing the credibility of the seemingly outlandish story. Caroline, who had already experienced the pain of not being believed after brutal assault by an older man when she was just 13 years old, couldn't bear the thought of being cross-examined in court, so she didn't pursue it. At the time, there was little to no understanding or concern for how victims of those kinds of assaults were treated by police, authorities, or the justice system, let alone the lasting psychological impact it had on them. Personally, I believe it's only in the last few years that real awareness has started to grow, and even today, the system remains deeply flawed. Fred and Rose were fined just £49 each for what was labeled indecent assault. Caroline believed that experience taught them a chilling lesson, that they couldn't afford to let their victims live. The guilt of surviving when others didn't weighed heavily on her for the rest of her life. Shortly after, the Wests went on a killing spree. In the span of just 9 months, they would kill 3 young women. What do you make of Caroline's terrifying encounter and the guilt she carried? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Back to 1994. During his arrest interviews, Fred revealed to detectives that he and Rose had planned to carry out a violent attack on Caroline that night and had even considered ending her life. Authorities informed Fred that the search had moved inside the house, into the cellar. When first questioned about Linda Goff's disappearance and why him and Rose had been seen wearing her clothes, Fred said nothing. But shortly after, his solicitor asked the lead inspector to sit down. What came next would change everything. Fred calmly confessed to taking 9 lives, including Linda Goff, his first wife Rena Costello, who hadn't been seen since 1971, her daughter Charmaine, and others yet to be identified. Police now knew there must be 12 victims. 3 were identified: 16-year-old Heather, 18-year-old Shirley Robinson, and 17-year-old Allison Chambers. All of them were found in the garden where the patio was. Outside the house, a media spectacle broke out. News outlets from all over the world set up camp. Reporters pushed past police barricades as wild theories spread about how many bodies lay buried and how many children Fred West may have fathered. Inside the house, the search for victims, more than anyone could have imagined, continued. Investigators now faced an excruciating task: digging into the foundation while preserving the structural integrity of the house. Inch by inch, they stripped away layers of walls, floors, and hardened cement, uncovering the secrets buried deep within the House of Horrors. 5 more victims were unearthed, which later were identified as Carol Ann Cooper, Lucy Partington, Therese Siegenthaler, Shirley Hubbard, and Juanita Mott. Alongside most victims' skeletal remains, police uncovered disturbing items: a knife, belts, bondage materials, plastic tubes that were placed in nostrils, makeshift masks fashioned from parcel tape. Some appear to have been molded directly onto the victims' faces, hinting at the terrifying final moments these poor girls must have endured. Professor Bernard Knight, a Welsh forensic pathologist tasked with examining the remains, called it bizarre stuff. It also emerged that Fred kept parts of the victims' remains as trophies, a behavior disturbingly common among serial killers. In his case, he held onto kneecaps, finger and ankle bones, a macabre reminder of the control he exercised over them. Then, finally, the remains of Linda Goff are found, buried beneath the bathroom floor. 25 Cromwell Street is empty at last. But the horror wasn't confined to Cromwell Street. During his confession, Fred revealed that bodies had been buried in 2 other locations as well, including 25 Midland Road, the West's former home before moving to Cromwell Street in 1972. His first wife, Rena, would later be found dismembered like most of Fred's other victims, buried near a quiet back road in the Gloucestershire countryside. Fred also mentioned another woman, Anne McFall, who, like Shirley Robinson, was 8 months pregnant with his child. He leads investigators to a remote field in Muchmarkel, Fred's birthplace. It took police nearly 2 months to excavate a site the size of an Olympic swimming pool in the search for her remains. Just as they were preparing to shut down operations, they finally uncovered what they were looking for. Investigators believed Anne was Fred's first victim, but the last one to be found. Even in custody, Fred continued to lie to protect Rose, but now, under arrest herself, Rose made no admissions whatsoever. Forensic psychologist Paul Britton later recalled in a documentary, she was psychologically much stronger, much more intact than Frederick West ever was. Fred and Rose were charged jointly, but any illusion of unity quickly vanished. Each time Fred tried to reach out, whether with a glance, a gesture, a touch, Rose would reject him. She turned away, ignored him completely, and met his attempts with cold indifference. This rejection visibly bothered Fred. Desperate to connect, he wrote her a letter. On January 1st, 1995, Rosemary's 41st birthday, Fred West took his own life at Winston Green Prison in Birmingham, while awaiting trial for the 12 counts of murder. Using prison blankets, he fashioned a robe and ended it, taking the truth to his grave and leaving Rose to stand trial alone. But what evidence was there to tie Rosemary directly to these crimes and get a conviction? The search at 25 Midland Road starts. It was there that 8-year-old Charmaine, daughter of Fred's first wife, Rena Costello, with another man had vanished. For over 2 decades, her small body lay buried beneath a layer of cheap linoleum by the kitchen window. As a child, Charmaine was in and out of care following the split between Rena and Fred, who was reported to have been violent towards her. In 1969, when Fred met Rose, he was caring for Charmaine, and soon the couple moved into the home of 25 Midland Road, with Fred's other daughter, with Rena, Anne-Marie. Charmaine was last seen in 1971, and investigators later discovered that during this time, Fred was serving a 9-month prison sentence. That meant 17-year-old Rose was left alone in the house, caring for Rena's daughters, Charmaine and Anne-Marie, along with her own infant daughter, Heather. With Fred behind bars at the time of Charmaine's disappearance, investigators reached the only conclusion: it could have been only Rosemary who killed her. Sometimes, when bodies are too decomposed to be recognized, all that's left is teeth. Let's get into the noteworthy forensic science of this case. To identify the victim's remains, Professor David Whitaker was brought in. He's a leading forensic odontologist, which means he's an expert who uses teeth and dental records to help identify bodies in criminal cases. Almost all of the 12 victims were identified through his work and dental profiles, because after so much time had passed, very little remained. In an interview, he explained, "Bones usually don't give you an inclination of who the victim is, but the face, skull, and teeth does. There's more information in your teeth about you and your lifestyle and your age and possibly how you died than there is in most other parts of the body, especially when the body is decomposed. Soft tissues have gone, teeth are still there. As part of his work, Dr. Whitaker compares police photos of potential victims smiling, carefully analyzing the height, tilt, and shape of their teeth to find a match with the skulls recovered and confirm the victim's identity. The search for a photograph of Charmaine smiling became a crucial part of the process. In a remarkable stroke of luck, Dr. Whitaker later recounted in an interview how he accidentally received a fax meant for Rosemary's defense team. "I couldn't believe it," he said. "It wasn't the kind of document you could just look away from. It was the photograph we'd been searching for months and months and months." Police also managed to track down the original photographer, who confirmed the date the photo was taken. This gave Dr. Whitaker a crucial reference point, allowing him to measure the growth of Charmaine's teeth from that image to her skull, and he was able to determine the approximate time of death. The conclusion was undeniable. Charmaine had died while Fred was behind bars, confirming that he couldn't have been the one who killed her. Another notable example of dental identification in this case was Lucy Partington. Her skull was recovered from the cellar, and forensic analysis revealed damage to her front teeth and temporary crowns, meaning that she had never got the chance to return to the dentist before her death. A female police officer on the case recalled an old incident involving a girl who had lost her front teeth during a hockey game. She asked Dr. Whitaker if it was possible the remains belonged to her. He was skeptical, since over 10,000 girls were missing in Britain at the time. The odds seemed slim, but he thought the lead just couldn't be ignored. And remarkably, it turned out to be her. That female police officer's memory led to the positive identification of Lucy Partington. Who really were these 12 victims, and how did they end up in the clutches of Fred and Rosemary West? I always feel like it's important to not just mention the victims by name, but go a little deeper and try to understand the circumstances that may have made them vulnerable to such tragic fates. So let's go through the stories in chronological order, one by one. Anne McFall was born in April 1949 and 18 years old when she vanished in the summer of 1967. She had been working in a knitwear factory after leaving school. She, as well as so many other victims, worked as a nanny for Fred's children with his first wife, Rena. Over time, Anne and Fred became lovers. During one of the periods when Rena was away, Anne was 8 months pregnant with Fred's child when she vanished. Fred's biographer, Geoffrey Wansell, recounts that according to Fred, she flirted with him relentlessly. Given Fred being a pathological liar, this claim obviously should be taken with a grain of salt. But what's more certain, though, is that Anne was described as naive and trusting, traits that likely made her an easy target for Fred's manipulations. She's widely believed to be his first murder victim. Her dismembered remains, along with those of her unborn baby, were discovered buried in a field near Fred's rural childhood home. Though he always denied killing her and no forensic evidence directly tied Fred to Anne's death at the time she was found, some details were disturbingly familiar. Several of Anne's finger and toe bones were missing, which was definitely Fred's modus operandi. It was also alleged that Fred confided to a visitor after his arrest that he had stabbed Anne following an argument. This murder occurred before he ever met Rosemary. Charmaine West was just 8 years old when she was killed in June 1971. Born in February 1963, she was Fred's stepdaughter from his first marriage to Rena Costello. Left in the care of a 17-year-old Rosemary, while Fred served a prison sentence, Charmaine became an early target of Rose's temper and cruelty. It is understood that the two did not get along at all, and Rosemary greatly disliked the child and loathed her rebellious nature. One chilling account comes from Tracy, Charmaine's best friend and next-door neighbor. One day, her mother sent her over to borrow some milk. As she walked in, she saw Charmaine standing on a chair with her hands tied behind her back with a belt, and Rose holding a large wooden spoon, looking like she was about to hit her. When Tracy's mother asked about it, Rose coldly said Charmaine had been naughty and deserved punishment. Anne-Marie Davis, Charmaine's half-sister and the biological daughter of Fred and Rena, later testified in court that one day she came home from school to find Charmaine gone. When she asked where her sister was, Rosemary coldly replied that Charmaine had gone to live with her mother. Tracy, Charmaine's best friend from next door, asked the same question, and Rose replied, "Gone to live with her mother, and bloody good riddance." Rosemary murdered Charmaine when Fred was incarcerated for 9 months for stealing car tires and stickers that show that vehicle tax had been paid. When he was released, he buried Charmaine beneath the kitchen window at the couple's first home. Heartbreakingly, Charmaine was never reported missing to police, which leads us straight to the next victim, 27-year-old Catherine Rena Costello, who was Fred's first wife and mother of Charmaine. Born in 1944, she was killed in August 1971, shortly after returning in an attempt to reclaim her 2 daughters, Charmaine and Anne-Marie. It is believed Fred murdered Rena to silence her and avoid an investigation into Charmaine's whereabouts. She is thought to have been strangled. Catherine was born in Scotland and married Fred West in Ledbury in 1962 when she was pregnant with Charmaine, whose biological father was another man. Known for her strong personality and often described as a tough and manipulative woman, Mr. Wansell noted that she was more than a match for Fred, and the couple went on to have their daughter Anne-Marie a year later. Rena left in 1969 amidst reports of violence and abuse. Family and friends lost contact with her in 1971. Linda Goff was born in May 1953 and was just 19 years old when she was killed in April 1973. A local to the area, her family lived nearby, and the private school she later attended was just around the corner from 25 Cromwell Street. After school, Linda worked as a seamstress and became friendly with several of the West's lodgers. She was known to have had relationships with some of them, and there were rumors that she and Rose would sometimes share lovers. Linda was the first victim, known in what appeared to be a killing driven by self-gratification, by both Fred and Rosemary. She went missing shortly after moving in with them in April 1973 and was reported missing by her parents. After her disappearance, as we discussed earlier, Linda's mother visited the Wests and saw Rose casually wearing Linda's clothes, which is just such a heartbreaking detail. And when questioned, the West insisted that Linda had simply moved on. Her parents believed them, holding on to the hope that one day Linda would just walk back through their door, until her remains were found, buried in the cellar. Carol Ann Cooper, affectionately also known as Cass, was just 15 years old. Born in Bedfordshire, a town roughly 2.5 hours from Gloucester, Carol was staying at the Pine Children's Home at the time of her disappearance in November 1973. She had been granted permission to stay that weekend with her grandmother. After a trip to the cinema, she boarded a bus back, but never made it home. Despite extensive police efforts, her whereabouts remained a mystery. I mean, can you imagine that poor grandmother? Detectives concluded the West had encountered her while she was trying to get back home and either luring her into the car or abducting her by force. She was assaulted, murdered, and buried beneath the house. A young life cut short. Lucy Partington was a 21-year-old university student, born in March 1952 and killed in December 1973. The girl who lost her teeth in a hockey game was studying English literature at Exeter University. She was described as a clever and much-liked woman by those who knew her. On December 20th, 1973, Lucy returned home to Cheltenham to spend Christmas with her family. She disappeared 2 days later, after leaving a friend's house in a rush to catch the last bus home. It is thought the West picked her up, likely offering her a ride, and well, you already know what happened next. Her mother directly reported her missing, launching a widespread search. In her particular case, there's harrowing evidence that she had been kept alive for several days. A week after she disappeared, Fred, in the early hours of January 3rd, 1974, went to a local hospital to get a deep laceration stitched. A knife matching the injury was found with Lucy's remains, leading police to believe he sustained the wound while dismembering her body. Her case was often seen as the one that attracted the most anger, partly because she was middle class and had recently converted to Catholicism. Lucy was also the cousin of novelist Martin Amis, best known for Money and Oilfields. In his memoir, he remembered his cousin with deep affection. Lucy was serious, resolute, artistic, musical, and religious. Even when we were children, the message I always took away from Lucy was that she wasn't going to be deflected, she wasn't going to be deterred. He also writes about Lucy's brother David, who had driven her into Cheltenham that night. He later expressed deep regret over what followed. I could so easily have driven her back. I offered to, but Lucy had decided to take the bus, and there was no point in arguing with her about a thing like that. If I had insisted, you could go on forever, he said, with a chain of ifs. This small, seemingly ordinary decision would become a source of lifelong sorrow for her family, a haunting example of how sudden life can change and how an apparent, trivial moment can lead to devastating change of fate. Ami goes on. Everything about her, even her name, pointed towards the light. Given this, I cannot find order or meaning in darkness so deep and durable. The death of Lucy Partington represents a fantastic collision. It is what happens when darkness meets light, when experience meets innocence, when the false meets the true, when utter godlessness meets purity of spirit. As overwhelming and tragic as this already is, these are only half of the victims so far. Therese Siegenthaler was born in November 1952 in Switzerland and killed 21 years later in April 1974. At 16, she left school but continued her education studying for a diploma in secretarial work. At the weekend, the petite with blondish mousy hair worked at a ballet shop in the Swiss Center at Leicester Square. Around Easter in 1974, at just 21 years old, she set off to hitchhike to Ireland to visit a friend. Confident and well used to hitchhiking, she had proclaimed to friends before that she could look after herself well, but she never reached her destination. Her family reported her missing, having not heard from her for some time. An investigation was carried out by the Metropolitan Police spanning a number of years, but without any answers. Therese had vanished without a trace. Shirley Hubbard was just 15 years old and the youngest of the victims found at 25 Cromwell Street. Born in June 1959 in Birmingham, she was described by those who knew her as pretty, spirited, and deeply vulnerable. Her early life was marked by instability. Her parents separated when she was just 2, and she was placed into care. At the time of her disappearance in November 1974, the teenager was doing a work experience at Debenhams in Worcester while going to high school. On the 14th of November, she left work as usual but never made it home. She was reported missing to police, but no trace was ever tracked down until her remains were found in the cellar with her skull completely covered in tape. Juanita Mott was 18 years old when she was murdered in April 1975. Born in March 1957, she was a former lodger at the West's home. She attended school in Gloucester and by 1972 had taken up several short-term jobs around the city. She was outgoing, attractive, rebellious, and strong-willed. Juanita was known for her independent spirit. In April 1975, she left her address in New End, reportedly heading to Gloucester. It was the day of her friend's wedding, but she never arrived. Her disappearance was never formally reported to police, even though her family contacted the Missing Persons Bureau and the media in hopes of finding her. At the time, Juanita had been staying with a friend of her mother's and was likely still in contact with the Wests, people she trusted. Not long after her death, the cellar floor, where victims' bodies had been arranged in a clockwise pattern, was sealed with concrete. And shockingly, that very room was then converted into a bedroom for the West children. I mean, you can't just make this up. Shirley Robinson was 18 years old and pregnant when she was killed in 1978. Born in October 1959, she had lived in both Germany and the West Midlands before eventually moving into 25 Cromwell Street in April 1977. Coming from a broken home, Shirley was described as outward-looking and rather worldly for her age. She became a lodger at the West's house and soon Fred's lover, carrying his child. It is said she also engaged in paid companionship for the Wests and also had intimate relations with Rose. According to several of the witnesses, Shirley flaunted her relationship with Fred and saw herself as Rosemary's replacement. As you can only guess by now, Rose was not happy about this, and that's a Rose you don't ever want to be around. Former lodgers later testified how this created tension in the house, so much so that Shirley eventually became frightened of the Wests, that she hid out in one of the lodgers' rooms to kind of stay away from them. Then, one day, when everyone was at work, a female lodger returned to find Shelley gone. Rose was the only one home that day. When asked, the Wests told them Shirley had hit one of their children and won't be coming around the house again. And another story that was told was Shirley had gone to live with relatives in Germany. Alison Chambers, also known as Al or Ali. She was just 17 years old at the time of her death in August 1979. Born in September 1962 in Hanover, West Germany, where her father was serving in the RAF, Alison later moved with her family to Swansea. By the age of 16, she had become a rebellious teenager and eventually moved into a children's home in Gloucester. She worked for a firm of solicitors as part of a youth training program and was described by friends as someone who craved constant attention and affection. She became a frequent visitor to 25 Cromwell Street and was eventually lured in with false promise of shelter and belonging. Alison told her own family that she had found a great family to stay with, and there was no need to worry. But just 3 months later, in August 1979, she disappeared. Her family contacted the Missing Persons Bureau, but police initially treated her as an absconder from care, a tragic misjudgment that left her case ignored for years. Her remains were eventually found in the garden, buried beneath the patio. Heather West, the 16-year-old whose disappearance would eventually expose the unimaginable crimes committed at 25 Cromwell Street. Born in October 1970, she was the first child of Fred and Rose and is believed to have been their final victim, murdered in 1987. Heather had been taken advantage of by her parents throughout her life. She lived with them on Midland Road until 1972, before they moved to Cromwell Street. As she entered her teenage years, Heather was described as rebellious and difficult, and reportedly refused to go along with her father's disturbing demands. What might have been a normal, if challenging, phase of puberty in any other household became something far more dangerous under Fred and Rose West. The growing friction between Heather and her parents would soon lead to fatal consequences. Heather and her half-sister Anne-Marie had tried for years to protect one another from their father's abuse. Anne-Marie, unable to endure the conditions any longer, found a job and was able to leave the home shortly before her 16th birthday. Heather was left behind and became the new focus of Fred's attention. At school, Heather began to speak up, sharing disturbing details about life at home and confiding in friends, even mentioning Rose's affairs. There's strong speculation that after years of enduring the unimaginable, Heather threatened or gave off a vibe that she was willing to go to police. That possibility made Fred and Rose nervous, too nervous, and it may have been the reason they decided to silence her. Over the years, Fred and Rose had taken their children to various hospitals, a staggering 31 times. On at least one occasion, a child was diagnosed with a condition no child should ever have. Yet, despite the reports, no agency intervened. No one connected the dots, or worse, no one cared enough. In June 1987, Heather had just finished her secondary school exams. She had hopes of working at a holiday camp to be able to leave the home and was anxiously waiting for the call. When she didn't get the job, her friends recalled her crying. This was not just a missed opportunity for a young girl, but her last chance to get away and save her life. In the aftermath of Heather's disappearance, Fred and Rose would offer inconsistent explanations. They told friends and authorities that she had become a lesbian and that she'd run away after allegedly harming her younger siblings while babysitting, also a story we have heard before. Rosemary would always insist that she had nothing but love for her eldest daughter. But the truth was far darker. On a rainy day, while the other children were at school, Heather was murdered. Her parents hurriedly dismembered her body, and her remains were reportedly stored overnight in a bin beneath the stairs. When her siblings came home that day, Heather was simply gone. And listen to this. Shortly after Fred started building the patio, the entire family celebrated its completion with a barbecue party. I mean, at this point, I don't even know what to say anymore. To summarize, as you have heard, the victims tended to fall into two distinct categories. Some were young women from often broken homes and possibly searching for safety, shelter, or a sense of belonging. The others were slightly older, more educated women from middle-class backgrounds and more stable homes. But regardless of where they came from, unfortunately, Fred and Rose found a way to trap and exploit them all. Renting out rooms to people in the house created a cover for strange behavior. Comings and goings, noise and visitors didn't raise suspicion in what looked like a busy working-class home. It also gave them access to vulnerable young women. Many lodgers were students, runaways, or young women with little family support. I don't think it has ever been fully confirmed whether some of the victims were physically abducted or simply lured into the car. The only insight we have is the lone surviving witness, Caroline, and by her account, it was described that she was coaxed into the car twice by Rose. So what does seem to be clear that in cases where the victims got in the car willingly, Rosemary, in my opinion, played the crucial role in convincing the young women to accept a lift from them. You would obviously trust a woman, or in this case a couple, way more than a lone strange man pulling up on you. I remember watching a documentary about this case for the first time when I was young, and I was thinking to myself, wow, it is not just men, and you also have to be careful of women too, and you can't trust anyone. And this was also the 70s. No mobile phones, no tracking apps, harder to get around, especially without a car in the countryside. It was also a time when people just weren't as aware of the dangerous and calculated ways that predators operate, like we are today. I think today we are far more cautious, but back then, trust came easier. And Fred and Rose were unfortunately very good at exploiting that to the detriment of these 12 lives. Let's get into their psychologies. Fred West grew up in a violent household where extreme behavior was normalized. His father reportedly believed it was acceptable to take advantage of others if you could get away with it, and Fred himself claimed to have been exploited as a child by his mother. These early experiences deeply distorted his understanding of relationships, control, and morality. He dropped out of school early and grew up into someone who viewed others, especially women, as objects to dominate. As a teenager, he suffered 2 major head injuries, which some people speculated may have damaged the areas of his brain linked to impulse control and empathy. Over time, Fred became a sadist, deriving gratification from control, humiliation, and violence. Psychologists believe Fred likely exhibited antisocial personality disorder, psychopathic traits, and a certain sadism disorder. He lacked remorse, lied easily, and treated life and death with cold detachment. Fred West was not just a serial killer. He was a manipulator and predator who built his life around secrecy, domination, and the total absence of empathy. Rosemary West met Fred when she was just 16, and while it's easy to assume that she was entirely groomed by him, the reality appears more complex. Fred may have provided the platform and initial influence, but Rose quickly flew past him. As Fred's own brother put it, Rose became more and more the boss. She was not a passive accomplice. Many believe Fred was emotionally dependent on her and at some point assisted her fulfilling her increasingly violent fantasies. A former neighbor, Catherine, spoke publicly about her time around the West. She described Fred as happy-go-lucky, but found Rose cold, controlling, and deeply disturbed. Catherine recalled an affair she had with Rose that began when Rose walked into a room naked and draped herself over her, with Fred silently watching. At one point, Rose brought a knife into one of these encounters, frightening Catherine so much to the point where she canceled any future plans with the couple. That decision really upset Rose, who could not tolerate rejection and wasn't being told no. Rose was not simply manipulated by Fred. Her own psychological profile reveals a deeply sadistic, emotionally detached individual shaped by early trauma and exposure to normalized violence. From a young age, she exhibited extreme deviance and a disturbing lack of empathy, an enjoyment in dominating and humiliating others. Unlike many female accomplices in serial crimes, Rose was not just assisting. She was active and often played the leading force in the crimes and was the more sadistic partner, taking pleasure in inflicting pain. So once they partnered, the violence escalated. Murder became routine. Serial killer couples are extremely rare, but very distinct. While most serial killers act alone, a small percentage, 5 to 10%, operate as pairs or in groups, and within that group, romantic couples are even rarer. As forensic psychologist Paul Britton on the case observed, the Wests probably got more joy, more satisfaction, more fulfillment out of what they did to these poor girls than anything else in their entire existence. The thrill is often sexual, emotional, and based on shared power fantasies. Together, they created a closed codependent dynamic in which they fed off each other's sadism, which reinforced their shared delusions and fantasies of power as well as violence, all while maintaining a chilling facade of normalcy. In October 1995, Rosemary West stood trial alone at Winchester Crown Court, facing 10 counts of murder. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. Over the course of 7 weeks, the jury heard harrowing testimony from survivors, family members, and forensic experts. The case against her was built on witness accounts, physical evidence, and statements Fred had made before his death. Her defense claimed she had been largely unaware of Fred's actions and manipulated by him to keep quiet. The case against Rosemary West drew heavily on forensic evidence we discussed earlier, but it was the voices of the survivors that truly exposed the depth of her crimes. Caroline Roberts was asked to take the stand, describing the terror she endured at the hands of Fred and Rose West. She thinks back, "I'm an adult now. Back then, I couldn't have handled it. But now, I can handle this. I'm gonna do it. What happened to me, what happened to those girls, and I want to at least get justice for them. I knew she wasn't innocent. When I was attacked, the nearest I came to death was at her hands, so I know she was capable of murder." Anne-Marie West, Fred's daughter, gave devastating testimony about years of systematic, intimate abuse and beatings, inflicted both by her father and stepmother on her and her siblings. And then there was Louise West, their biological daughter, the first to break the silence in 1992. She is the one who told social services about the violence inside the home and the dark family joke. In court, she confirmed what many feared. Louise's testimony was a turning point. It proved Heather's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of a horrific pattern. On November 22, 1995, Rosemary West was found guilty on all 10 counts of murder. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment, stating she should never be released. She became one of the very few British women to receive a whole life sentence. To this day, Rose West, now 71, has never confessed or shown remorse. She's still alive and serving a lifelong sentence in a prison in West Yorkshire. In the aftermath of Fred and Rose West's arrest, their younger children were placed into foster care and given new identities to protect them from media attention and public scrutiny. Some have chosen to remain private, while others have gradually shared their stories, offering insight into the long-term trauma of growing up inside one of Britain's most infamous households. Anne-Marie West faced years of emotional fallout, including attempts of ending her own life in 1995 and 1999. She lost her job as a dinner lady after the trial, when children became hysterical upon recognizing her. Later, she wrote a memoir, detailing the abuse she endured and her journey to recovery. Mae West, Fred and Rose's biological daughter, has publicly discussed the horrors of life at 25 Cromwell Street. In interviews, she has voiced fears that her parents may have murdered even more victims than those officially identified. And 1 year after Halloween, her daughter said to her, "Mom, you'll never guess someone went as your parents." Stephen West, another of their sons, also struggled deeply. A reporter once described him as being in a traumatized state, and strangers often slammed the door in his face due to his unsettling resemblance to Fred. In 2002, he also attempted to take his own life. 2 years later, he was convicted of a certain type of offense involving a minor. His defense cited the severe psychological damage of his upbringing. Barry West, one of the younger children, and reportedly witnessed the murder of his sister Heather. He battled addiction and mental illness throughout his life and died in 2020 from a suspected overdose at the age of 40. These stories reveal the haunting legacy of their parents, trauma that just doesn't end but shapes every part of the children's lives as they're left to manage on their own. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was deliberately demolished to prevent it from becoming a macabre tourist site or morbid shrine and people trying to break in for trophies. The area was turned into a quiet footpath, connecting nearby roads with no plaque or marker, a deliberate effort to erase the physical trace of what happened there. The survivor, Caroline Roberts, passed away in August 2016 at the age of 61, following a brief but aggressive battle with cancer. Her diagnosis came just weeks before her death, and her illness progressed rapidly. She was the only known survivor of Fred and Rosemary West, and the woman who offered the world its first glimpse into the horrors of 25 Cromwell Street. Speaking in 2004, Caroline reflected on the deep guilt she had carried for decades. I felt guilty the other girls died. I wish I had gone to court with the assault charge, as Fred might have been locked away for a couple of years. Some of them could have survived. Caroline shared her story through interviews and in 2 memoirs, The Lost Girl and The One That Got Away. In her first book she wrote, "I did feel a lot of guilt and do wish I had done something, but writing the book helped me come to terms with everything. Now I don't think it's my fault. There's been a lot of tragedy in my life, and I've always felt jinxed. Now I feel like a survivor." The mother of 4 was known for her resilience, her compassion, and her extraordinary courage. She even expressed forgiveness towards Fred and Rose, and hoped to one day speak with Rose and their children, though that meeting never came to pass. Her strength and willingness to share her story and darkest chapter of her life have left a lasting impact, ensuring that the victims' voices continue to be heard. Too late, when the system fails the most vulnerable. The West case exposed major failures and issues in the UK justice and child protection systems. Despite repeated signs of abuse, bruises, school reports, and cries for help, social services, police, and schools failed to intervene effectively for years. Multiple opportunities to save victims, including the West's own children, were missed. As a result, the case sparked nationwide reforms in how child exploitation allegations are handled. Agencies were urged to improve information sharing, mandatory reporting, and follow-ups on missing children. It also led to greater scrutiny of how domestic abuse, exploitation, and neglect are monitored in complex family settings. The story of Fred and Rose West is more than a catalogue of some of the worst crimes reported in our recent history. The case is a mirror held up to the systems that looked away, to the institutions that missed the bruises, ignored the warnings, and failed to act when it mattered the most. For over 2 decades, victims came and went from a house in plain sight. Runaways, daughters, lodgers, many already invisible to the world, before the Wests ever found them. They were vulnerable not just to the monsters, but to the silence around them. Rose West shattered all expectations of what a female perpetrator could be: violent, dominant, and unrelenting. And while the nation watched in horror as the truth came out, it was the survivors who carried the aftermath, unheard, disbelieved, and re-traumatized by the very systems meant to protect them, and then forgotten, left to deal with the stigma and damage on their own. Yes, some reforms followed, better coordination between schools, police, and social services. But did it change how survivors of those types of assaults were treated? How abuse within families was handled? At the time of the West case, the R word within marriage had only recently been criminalized in the UK in 1991. Despite the horrific abuse revealed during the investigation, there were no immediate reforms in how women reported these acts or how police handled those cases. Survivors like Caroline Roberts bravely spoke out, but victim support services and trauma-informed approaches were still lacking. Real progress in these areas wouldn't come until the 2000s and beyond, driven by later cases and growing public pressure. In the end, this isn't just a story about the House of Horrors and crimes beyond the average scale and brutality. It is a story about how long it took someone to knock on that door and how many lives were lost before they did. More victims. One of the girls suspected to have fallen victims to the West was Mary Bastom, a 15-year-old who vanished in 1968 while waiting at a bus stop in Gloucester. She was last seen near the Pub and Cafe, where she worked part-time, a location later linked to Fred West, who was a regular there, and it was rumored he did renovation work in the cafe around the same time. Mary's body was never found, but Fred allegedly confessed to her murder while in custody, claiming he had buried her remains beneath the cafe. In 2021, an ITV documentary crew alerted authorities to potential evidence connected to Mary's 53-year-old disappearance. Gloucestershire police launched an extensive excavation of the basement, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. Despite intense public speculation and media attention, no remains were recovered, and Mary's case remains unsolved. The program also claimed that during its 7 months investigation, potential burial sites had been identified. 2 of the key locations investigators urged authorities to excavate were Fingerpost Field near Muchmarkel in Hertfordshire, the village where Fred West was born and where Anne McFall's remains were found, and another nearby field where the body of Rena Costello, Fred's first wife, was discovered. Despite renewed pressure, Gloucestershire police have ruled out the possibility of any further excavations. A police spokesperson stated, "After careful assessment, we do not believe the evidence submitted at this time meets the threshold to justify additional searches in the locations identified." It's worth noting that the excavation of the cafe in 2021 alone cost £55,000, highlighting the financial burden decision-makers would probably consider. In another lead, multiple individuals who had contacts with the Wests in the 1990s claimed that more bodies could be buried on a farm near Berkeley, on the outskirts of Gloucestershire. Several of them told police they believe Fred had hidden additional victims there. Among them were Wendy and Derek Thompson, 2 former employees of the Wests who claimed Fred once told them he had done something in Berkeley. Janet Leach, the social worker who served as Fred West's appropriate adult during police interviews, shared even more disturbing claims. As reported by the Daily Mail, she said, "Fred told me there were another 20 bodies to be found after the 12. He said some of the victims' bones were missing because it was a ritual thing, and they did something with the fingers, so there was no way of finding out who they were." Mae West, now a mother herself, who wrote the memoir Love as Always, Mom, XXX, the true and terrible story of surviving a childhood with Fred and Rose West, revealed in an interview in 2018 that she had believed in the mother's innocence for over a decade, before finally turning against her. She also shared that she believes her parents may have killed many more women than the 12 officially confirmed victims. She says, "We didn't see any evidence of that at all, but people asked me, 'Do you think he stopped?' And I don't think he did. I think he stopped using the house." Rumors about other people's involvement in the West crimes began surfacing not long after the case broke. Some speculated that the couple was part of a wider network. Caroline Roberts recounted in a documentary that Fred and Rose had threatened her, saying, "And we're gonna let our lot of friends use you. And when they've finished with you, we're gonna kill you and bury you under the paving stones of Gloucester." Now, just to be clear, what follows is speculation. These are alleged theories and rumors that surfaced in the aftermath of the case. These claims have not been officially confirmed and should be viewed as unverified. Please do your own research, think critically, and form your own conclusions. This section is intended for discussion and awareness, and with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the other cases that have alleged connections with the Wests. The Czech Exploitation Gang. In 2011, a major exploitation ring was uncovered, operating across the UK and Czech, and was linked to 25 Cromwell Street. The investigation led by British and Czech authorities resulted in multiple convictions, including 2 women who were sentenced to 9 and 11 years. Their sons and other gang members also received prison time. More than 50 women were confirmed victims, with another 65 victims known only through digital images found on a perpetrator's computer. Most had been lured to the UK with promises of work, only to be forced into non-consensual exploitative commercial acts or sham marriages that enabled non-EU men to stay in the country. That this operation used properties once tied to the West reignited questions about whether they were truly acting alone. In a separate but chilling case, police excavated the former home of David and Pauline Williams in Branage, Devon, in May 2016, following an anonymous tip-off that a baby's body might be buried on their property. The Williamses had been convicted the year before, in 2015, for the long-term exploitation and abuse of at least 10 children over a 15-year period, some as young as 7. Back in the 1990s, David and Pauline Williams ran the Prince Albert pub in Gloucester, where they came into contact with Fred and Rose West. In an interview, Fred himself admitted to being a regular at the pub. After relocating from Gloucester, the couple went on to run the Victoria Inn in Exeter, before eventually moving to Devon in the mid-90s, where the disturbing investigation into their past would eventually unfold. The couple had long-standing ties to Fred and Rose, including social connections and disturbing correspondence. A cryptic postcard, believed to have been sent by the Wests in 1990 and addressed to the West-Williams menagerie raised serious questions. The postcard suggested that the Williamses were caring for some of the West children at the time during their canal holidays. The unsettling message on the card read, "Colin says the birds," which is a UK slang for women or girls, "are very friendly here. Loads of wildlife, especially when the soup exploded all over the galley. Several fishermen have also lost their ground bait. Mom and Dad XX." I don't even know. But people have noted that the language may have been coded, possibly referencing a network. Although no remains were found during the excavation, the case reignited speculation that the two couples, David and Pauline Williams and Fred and Rose West, may have been part of a wider ring. During his trial, David Williams had even boasted of the ties to Fred West. While no other formal link has ever been made between the Williamses and the West murders, the disturbing parallels in their patterns and their documented social closeness has left very unsettling questions. The underground tunnels in Gloucester. Back in the day, in the mid-late 2000s, when YouTube was a very different place than it is today, you could find an unbelievably amount of real TV documentaries from all over the world on YouTube. Of course, they weren't all in English. But I grew up in Germany, and a lot of those documentaries that were in German were about cases that happened in our neighboring countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. In some of those documentaries, witnesses talked about tunnels in connections with exploitation networks as well. This is not related to the 25 Cromwell Street case, but these theories have been around for a very long time, and they cross country lines. In 2023, The Sun reported on long-standing rumors that Fred West may have had access to a concealed network of underground tunnels beneath Gloucester, some believed to run just yards from his home at 25 Cromwell Street. The tunnels, dating back to Roman times, were historically used for smuggling and wartime purposes. Urban explorers estimate there are around 22 miles of these passages beneath the city. Locals and former workers have long speculated that West's work as a builder gave him unique access to these tunnels and possibly used them to hide evidence or bodies. Though no official link has been confirmed, these theories persist. In 1989, a worker apparently discovered a human hand and arm in one such tunnel, leading to an interview with detectives investigating the Wests. Despite these findings, authorities have been hesitant to acknowledge the tunnel's existence, possibly due to concern about uncovering further crimes linked to the Wests. Some believe there's been a coordinated effort as well to seal off entrances all over the city. Locals insist everyone knows they're there. If there's nothing to hide, why not let people in? Former city councillor Pam Tracy, after touring the tunnels in 2019, admitted they were far more extensive than I could have imagined. I think it would be ideal to open up the tunnels to the public. However, I think some of the areas should be left because goodness knows what they would find. Fred West's biographer Geoffrey Wansell believes it's plausible the tunnels were used. But nothing would surprise me when it comes to Fred West. Still, he stresses, there's no documented police mention of tunnels in any interviews with Fred or Rose. Wansell adds, it was once memorably put to me by a police officer that you cannot dig up the entire county of Gloucestershire in a search for more bodies. He also said, there is always a lot of speculation about this side and that side. If I knew, I would certainly be talking about it. It always comes up every time and in many ways, inevitably. But the mystery of Fred West won't be solved, probably ever. We will never get to the complete bottom of it. It is one of those that will go on, and he surely is right about that. And that brings us to the end of my first episode. If you found this deep dive compelling or you learned anything new, please give the video a like and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. And what do you believe? Are more victims out there? What part of this case stayed the most with you? And what do you make of this creepy, weird, cryptic postcard and the mysterious tunnel system under Gloucester? I'd love to hear thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and take care of yourselves because it's a dark world out there. And I'll see you in the next one.